Hey, welcome to Herp Corner, where we'll be discussing the checkerboard worm lizard, also known as Trogonophis wiegmanni. They're long with black and white checkers all over their bodies, with a round tail meant to look like their head. They often afflict their tongues like a lot of reptiles. Their eyes are small, blue, and beady. The average size for this species is around 4 inches, give or take. They live for roughly 3 or 4 years. The checkerboard worm lizard is a part of the clade Amphisbaenia. A clade is a group of families with similar ancestry. Amphisbaenia is a group of legless worm lizards. You might recognize some of the families included. Here we've got Bipedidae, which includes Bipes biporus, the Mexican mole lizard, a funny pink burrowing animal with only 2 legs, and Amphisbaenidae, which includes the red worm lizard, a limbless Floridian worm lizard that drives me crazy. Now, something that might, and I mean might, be crossing your mind is the question, well, what's the difference between a legless lizard and a snake? And that, my friend, is what I will tell you. Look at this image. This right here is a Gaboon Viper, undeniably a snake. There are some parts I want you to take note of. Note the lack of ear holes and visible eyelids. Also, fun fact about snakes, a good way to tell where the tail is based on where the cloaca is. The cloaca for this one is right around here, something like that, meaning all that's past it is a tail. Now, look at this image. This is a Kenyan sand boa. Once again, no ears, no visible eyelids, short tail. Now, let's look at some legless lizards. Yep, that's ear hole, and ear hole. Long tail, and a long tail. And, oop, eyelid. Now, let's get back to worm lizards. Specifically, the checkerboard worm lizard. Wait. Where's the ear hole? Can't really tell if they have eyelids in most of these. Is that a short tail? Okay. It seems to actually be the same with most Amphisbaenians. Oh, jeez. Well, to get back to the initial question, well, what's the difference between a legless lizard and a snake? With worm lizards specifically, the ancestry? It's ancestry. They've got more of a similar ancestry with lizards than with snakes. That, and the fact that not all Amphisbaenians like limbs. Just look at the Mexican mole lizard. They slowly evolved to lose their legs due to their lifestyle not really needing them. I mean, they get around just fine with using their heads to burrow. Alright, that's it. Case closed. Also, hi. This is Quinn from the future, here to say that all the differences I covered still apply to legless lizards, just not worm lizards, which is an important distinction I forgot to make. Basically, legless lizards are the ones with exterior ear holes and movable eyelids and long tails, not so much worm lizards. Also, a lot of people believe that snakes don't have eyelids, which just isn't true. They have see-through eyelids which are constantly shut. That is why you'll never see a snake blink. Okay, back to the video. Also, fun fact, even though they don't have ear holes, worm lizards and snakes can still hear. The skull still has room for ear canals, so the skin on the outside of said ear canals can transmit vibrations directly to the cochlea. They sacrificed ear holes for the evolutionary purpose of not having dirt fall into their ears, because that sucks. A lot of other burrowing lizards evolved with similar things to prevent dirt from falling in. For instance, blue-tongued skinks have pointed scales that shield the ear holes from digging down. So now that we got that out of the way, we can look at the species' history. The checkerboard worm lizard was discovered in 1830 by Johann Jakob Kopp, a German naturalist. They're native to northern Africa, specifically the Western Sahara, Morocco, Algeria, and Tunisia. They're mostly in Morocco. Then there's a big gap in distribution where they only start showing up in Tunisia and far east of Libya. I'm not super well versed in animal distribution, so if you want to learn more about this, I'd recommend a paper on Science Direct about it. Link in the description. The IUCN Red List judges this species as least concern. A good help to this species might be the fact that almost the entirety of where they live is a protected piece of land, or two, mostly national parks. Legitimate threats to the species' population are minimal, being them losing appropriate hides like stones or logs, or losing land to agriculture. Though, again, much of where they reside is protected, so it's not much of a concern. The checkerboard worm lizard thrives in multiple different environments, mostly loose ground. usually sandy soil, with some sort of covering, anything ranging from dead leaves to stones. They're found in pasture lands, temperate forests, and steppe land. Steppe land is a flat, unforested land. For the most part, they reside in hot and dry areas, though most of their time is spent underground and on the underbellies of rocks, so they don't have to deal with the heat. Keeping this in mind, the care for this species is rather simple. I'd recommend the typical dirt substrate of Exoterra plantation soil, as usual. You could, theoretically, mix some sand into the substrate for it to be more like the ground in the wild, but should you? I don't think they can tell the difference. They're tiny and, no offense, pretty simple-minded. Put them in a tub of dirt and they'll have a blast. I said in the past that even burrowing species should be given climbing opportunities for enrichment, but for these, I really do not think that is the case. Their body just is not meant for climbing, and I don't think it interests them particularly. They just want to dig. Legitimately, that's all they like. Except for, eating, of course. Speaking of which, their diet should consist almost entirely of night crawlers or earthworms. Feeding should be maybe once every other day, and make sure it's always dusted with repticalcium, and always live. It is important to supply with variants every now and then. Though their small checkerboard worm lizards have jaws strong enough to crush hard invertebrates like mealworms and small roaches, it's important to note that even though mealworms are easier to come by than most other invertebrates I list, never ever feed an animal those solely. Invertebrates with hard outer shells, such as mealworms, superworms, and crickets, are high in chitin, which can cause impaction if the diet consists only of these animals. Impaction is a condition that develops when something indigestible builds up in an animal's intestine until it clogs something like feces. If not treated, it can be fatal. Though it's most commonly known to affect baby leopard geckos when housed on sand, it can also be common with reptiles fed entirely hard-shelled invertebrates. As for the enclosure casing, though you could use a glass terrarium, a more efficient type would be a simple storage tub. Now I know what you're thinking. And no, this is not the same as housing a ball python in a tiny box with a paper towel and a water bowl in a dark place and calling it a day. First off, this animal is much smaller, so something that we may consider to be a small tub could be a perfect place for some tunneling by the checkerboard worm lizard. Second off, ball pythons have been studied to utilize basking spots, so jot that down. A plastic, maybe 15-gallon storage tub with some dirt substrate and a water bowl would be good. For water bowls, I'd recommend something shallow that they can easily go in and out of. They're probably never going to full-on soak, but something that's easy access would be good. Like a lot of fossorial species, checkerboard worm lizards will most likely be spending a lot of time under the water bowl for some extra humidity. Consider keeping isopods and springtails with them to break down any waste produced by the lizard. If you want to be extra, then do some under-tank heating via heat mat with a thermostat. An under-tank temperature of roughly 80 degrees is alright, nothing too hot, and that isn't necessary. Basking has never been a documented behavior of this species, so a heat lamp probably won't do any good. Humidity is okay for this species, just not a lot of it. Spraying the tank with water maybe once every other day is alright. Keep in mind that tubs are much better at holding humidity than glass enclosures because of less ventilation. It's vital to maintain a moderate to low humidity, considering if the humidity levels are high, health issues such as scale rot can occur. They don't need a crazy damp enclosure or a super dry one. If you're a numbers guy, I'd recommend somewhere in the 30s or 40s for humidity. If you notice some shedding happening, feel free to spray the substrate a little more than normal, just to help them out with it. When it comes to handling the checkerboard worm lizard, they're probably the most docile. They're, from what I've seen, not inclined to bite, and if they do bite, it's not going to hurt like a Schultepusic or a red worm lizard. Those have scary strong jaws. These ones are fairly tame, with their only defense mechanism probably being pooping or trying to wriggle free. They're not like blue-tongued skinks or bearded dragons in that they don't have any claws you've got to worry about, since they don't have hands. There's very minimal danger when it comes to handling them. If you do reptile education programs, they probably do great with those, considering how mellow they can be. Generally, the care for this species is pretty simple. However, it's safe to say there are very few individuals actually for sale, not to mention the little to no captive breeding of this animal in progress. The only checkerboard worm lizards I've seen are wild caught, which I only condone for those who are planning on breeding, who are experienced breeders. The wild caught, they're sold from $150 to around $300. However, most of the shops selling them are out of stock, but since they're wild caught, any one you get has a high likelihood of carrying parasites, mites, or fungal infections. This is because of the high amount of specimens in the wild that carry parasites, mites, or fungal infections. So if you do ever get this species, be prepared for a hefty vet bill. That is, if you even have an exotic vet in your area. All in all, definitely not recommended for beginners. With that said, the breeding of the species is roughly documented. We know the basics, alright? The checkerboard worm lizard has sexual dimorphism, which is when the males look different from the females. The males of this species have a black or brown head, while the females have a black or brown head with a lightly colored splotch on the nose. Other than that, there are very few visual indicators of the species' sex, though, like with most reptiles, you could always probe them. Probing is the action of gently inserting a probe into the cloaca to tell the sex of an animal based on predetermined indicators. Snake Discovery has a good video on the process, so I won't go too far into it. Just know that generally, if a species lacks sexual dimorphism, probing is, for the most part, an answer. This worm lizard is ovoviviparous, meaning the eggs hatch inside the mother, not to be confused with viviparous, which means the mother gives birth live. Since the species is ovoviviparous, no incubation is necessary, which makes breeding a lot easier. There are usually anywhere from 2 to 5 babies that are produced in this process. Make sure each one is in their own enclosure. Yes, there are no documented occurrences of territoriality or of the babies eating each other, but would you rather play it safe or check on them one day to find one baby missing? Anyway, with breeding any animal, it's important to brumate them as well, just to give them a break. Brumation is when an animal slows down its metabolism for the winter. It's similar to hibernation, except for the fact that the animal can still walk around, bask, and drink, just not eat. For this species, brumation is easy considering how simple the enclosure is. Simply shut off the heat source and feed them minimally during the cold days of winter. Again, this is only necessary if you breed them. With non-breeding animals, brumation isn't needed, but it's okay to do. That's all for this installment of Herp Corner. As always, sources will be in the description. If you learned something new with this one, feel free to subscribe. I do this every other week. Have a good evening, morning, or afternoon. Thank you for listening, watching, whatever.